and welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm your host, Joanne LaFleur. A very happy new year to you. It's 2019. We're into a fresh new year, but we're still finishing up season 1 of Word Made Digital. We have a few more episodes to offer you in season 1, and I'm recording season 2. I can't wait to start sharing a little bit more later about who's going to be on season 2. You're going to love it. But today on the show, we have Chris Vacher. Chris Vacher is a colleague of mine. We work together at C4 Church, and he is one of our executive pastors. He oversees all things to do with our site strategy, our multi-site strategy, and our services. So he comes from a worship pastor background and now is overseeing all of our services across our sites. And so we're going to be talking about something about the pressure principle, the idea of how to give artists pressure at times in order to get great work out of them. We're going to talk about something we've done at C4 called the Heartsy Awards. That's giving awards to our creative team and how we give those out and why we give those out. Talking about his book, he does a devotional team Bible study for worship teams called 52 Sundays. And as it says, it's 52 Sundays of Bible studies for teams to do together, and why people want to study together with their teams as they serve and lead. Also, of course, the big thing we're getting into, if you know anything about Chris Vacher already, is we're going to talk about songwriting. He leads up all things songwriting here at C4 with C4 Worship, and songwriting in Canada has been part of his world for a long, long time. Talking about songwriting as discipleship, how we write songs as a team, but also why local churches need to write songs for their church. And so I can't wait to dive into this podcast episode with Chris. He's a friend, and we banter a lot back and forth, and he also just gives so much value to us. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Chris Vacher. So here we go.
You're listening to the Word Made Digital podcast with Joanna LaFleur, where we discuss all things creative and communications for the church. The church carries the best news in the world, so we want to help you be the best creatives and communicators in the world. Let's go.
Well, hey, Chris Vacher, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. I'm happy to get you.
I just had to walk down the hallway because we're very close a lot of the time.
That's true, except you say that as if it was so easy to get this conversation. Now, just, the behind the scenes on this, we are starting this later than we intended today because you got other meetings going on, and we tried to do this a few weeks ago, but you had other meetings going on. So as much as it is easy to talk casually, it's hard to sit down and have a real conversation.
And the reason is we work together.
Yeah. So, Chris, who are you? Tell us a bit about yourself.
So, my name is Chris Vacher. I am one of the pastors at C4 Church, and I get to work with you, Joanna, and lots of other great people. And I oversee everything that happens in our worship services. So, the worship side, the production side, I work with whoever's preaching and kind of the design of the services, as well as what happens in our multi-site kind of philosophy. So we're a multi-site church, 3 sites. We're gearing up to launch our 4th site. So working with all of our site pastors and other teams that do everything across multiple sites, which is a whole lot of fun.
Yeah. And you didn't start here. You've been here. Well, even at C4, you've had a lot of jobs.
So I'm
familiar with that as well.
Yeah.
A few different hats around here.
So I started on staff January 2014 as the worship pastor, creative arts pastor, where we got to work really closely together. And now in this role, but I've been in full-time church ministry since 2003. This is my 3rd church, and just, I've been able to focus on worship ministry, and really the heart probably around leader development and creative development in a bunch of different environments.
Yeah. No, I want to get into all that, but before we go there, tell us a little bit about the band that you used to be in back when you were young.
I was in university. I was younger than I was now. I was in university, and a friend of mine had been part of a band, and they were looking to add a couple people, and they had this opportunity. So we got along really well. I loved those guys, and so we spent like the bulk of 5 years traveling all over Canada and the U.S., leading worship, doing youth retreats, playing at churches, recording our own stuff.
Is your stuff on Spotify or anything? Oh my goodness, could we hear it?
I doubt it. I'd be surprised. But every now and then my wife will pull out the CD and she'll put it on at home for our kids to listen to. And it's
good.
equal
I love
parts
it.
like it's equal parts total cringeworthy, and I'm so grateful. Like, you know, when you're living, we had the definite sense like we were living in the good old days, like, and we knew it when it was happening.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. You weren't missing it when it was
Oh,
happening.
no. It wasn't always fun, but like we loved it.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, just random things. You and I went to the same university, but
We did.
You were a few years ahead of me. We went to the same camp, but you were a
Yes.
few years ahead of me.
Yeah.
A guy in your band was a guy who was a pastor at my previous church. So
Lots of
I feel
connections.
like before we worked together,
Yep.
there were these paths that nearly almost crossed for so many years.
like- we had no option. It was inevitable. Eventually our universes would collide.
That's it, in other cities and other places, but now here we are. And, okay, tell us, because I've actually heard about this from the other guy who I used to work with,
Yep.
who you were in a band with, the Turkey trip. But you've talked about how that was awesome. Tell us about the Turkey trip.
Yeah, so one of the things, man, it's like a life highlight. So in 2003, we got to do a missions trip as a band. And so we raised support just like you would for any other ministry trip. And we packed our bags and got on a plane and flew to Istanbul. And we spent, I think it was about 10 or 12 days traveling around Turkey. And now what you may not know about Turkey is they love rock music. Like Metallica is still the biggest band in Turkey.
Okay.
They also love everything North American and European. They're trying to get to the EU, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So when we showed up as a Canadian rock band, like we would drive into cities and there would be our posters all plastered all over, and then we would roll into a town that like we've never heard of, and no joke, there would be like 1,000 people in this outdoor courtyard, and we would just do our music, and then we would get to talk a little bit. There would be a Turkish translator, and the heart of it was run by these American missionaries to Turkey who were just so fantastic, like loved the people, wanted them to know Jesus, would use different creative outlets and creative outreaches to build relationships with people and ultimately get them to other kinds of venues where they could share the gospel, talk about Jesus, start churches.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
So you're playing Christian music in public way, like, because I mean Turkey is not an open country, so is it okay to play the music?
It was, as long as we weren't explicitly using the name of Jesus or explicitly kind of verbalizing the gospel. But we would,
So you could sing "Open the Eyes of My Heart" because
you could sing about
it doesn't
God.
say
You could
the
sing
name
about
of Jesus.
faith.
I don't think. Yeah.
You could tell stories. So we would tell stories between songs that would we would then be able to say to hey, and if you want to know more, we'd love to see you in a couple nights here.
I see. Yeah.
But no, it was very. I mean, we needed permits from local government officials and all kinds of stuff. So.
Yeah.
But it was a blast. It was like, man, who wouldn't love to go with 5 of your best friends and travel through Turkey, which was an incredibly gorgeous country. Yeah. And it was,
And the food there, woo!
Yeah, it was pretty special.
Yeah. I've been to Turkey on a mission trip myself, and I was just with a friend recently who was on the trip, and we were reminiscing about this shawarma, this like this meat and pita thing that we ate that like it's just we've never been the same. We'll never find it again. I'm sure you know what I mean if you've been anywhere sort of Mediterranean.
It's worth the trip.
Yeah, I mean, but all this stuff. I mean, you come from a rich background of music and ministry, and I think from a variety of churches that allows you to you see the stuff that's kind of nothing new. Like every church in some ways has similar problems to each other to solve, and yet there's some uniquenesses to each place that we go. But I'm curious to get into some of the creative conversation with you around, as you've led creative teams in different places, in different contexts, you talk about this pressure and release thing. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think the foundation of one of the things that's always true in ministry is there is this tension between people who are in leadership and people who are creatives, and they get labeled with this creative noun rather than adjective. And so what do we do with creatives? And sometimes it can go really, really great, and sometimes it can go really, really bad, and nobody wants it to go really, really bad. So I've learned along the way some just principles about leading artists and leading creatives, leading people who have this unbelievable ability to like express or verbalize or put into picture something that we all feel. Or who are able to express something that like, we don't know yet that we need to feel it, but we do need to feel it, and artists really help us do that. So this idea, I'm not sure when it sort of became clear to me, and I probably learned it through experience and trial and error. a lot of error along the way, is just this idea of the pressure principle. So I think, leaders, if you're in a leadership type role, you tend to think like, okay, we've got an idea for a project and I want to see that project delivered by date X. And so those of you who are delivering the creative side of that project need to know that the delivery date is date X and I expect all of it to be there. And the truth is, working with artists and working with creatives, it doesn't matter if the deadline is 3 days away or 30 days away. They're not going to start into it until the pressure, like the pain of not working on it, is greater than the pain of working on it.
Right.
So, that gets labeled as that procrastination or laziness sometimes. And really,
which I don't think it is. Yeah.
I would agree. And so what I've kind of developed over time is this idea that a really great leadership strategy with creatives and artists is to use this pressure principle, like leverage this idea and sort of create these artificial deadlines. So rather than saying, hey, here's our deadline and our deadline is 100 days out, to actually look, okay, between day 0 and day 100, what are some of the things that need to happen? So if it's you're doing a sermon series, maybe it's like, hey, by day 10, we need a sermon series title. That's it. And by day 20, we need a main sermon series graphic. And by day 30, and to build layers where you're able to kind of artificially create this pressure principle, rather than saying, no, by day 100, I need it all delivered in one shot. And it does a couple of things. One, it helps artists to break things up. Often creatives just get overwhelmed by the size of a project and they don't know where to start, so they don't start at all, which isn't helpful for anybody. But the second thing it does is the backside of the pressure principle, which is like one great thing to leverage an artist is like if you can put the pressure on, and then if you can have a release valve. It's those times when like the pressure gets released and there's a chance to decompress a little bit that actually the great ideas come, or the margin for rethinking an idea. So rather than saying, hey, we're going to wait everything until day 100, to create these deadlines along the way builds pressure leading up to those artificial deadlines, but also is a chance to like have a release valve where maybe, day 12, you turn around and you're like, oh, actually that wasn't the best thing. I think I can do better. And now you've still got 88 days.
Yeah, you still have runway
to the final deadline. So, but I'm using it as one example, but I think it applies to a lot of different things about creating, even in, if you're thinking about a worship team on a Sunday, what time do they arrive? What time does rehearsal start? What time does pre-service walkthrough start? And rather than just to say, oh, here's the arrival time and here's all 12 things that need to happen, but actually to have different markers through a day like that, so that, creatives can have like a bit of a roadmap of what the expectations are and where they're going. But it's the idea behind it is this pressure principle, where they're not going to really move hard and fast until the pressure of not working on it is greater than the pain of actually just getting to work. Yeah.
And so, when you lead a team of other people, it maybe if it's a more senior leader talking, that's a great concept that they can build in and mark those days on the calendar. But for their team. But what if you're doing it for yourself? Like, how do you create that even in your own work when you're leading your own deliverables?
Yeah, self-leadership is the hardest part of it. Whether you're an artist working for a great leader or not, self-leadership becomes the biggest thing. So I've developed some really great rhythms. They've served me really well. And the biggest one would be Sabbath. And we've just come out of a Sunday where we talked about that. But the priority and the importance of getting that day on my calendar every single week before anything else. And so for me, that's Friday evening to Saturday evening, and I don't do any work and I disconnect from a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean I'm secretive and I go and I hide away. It actually gives me freedom to do more things with friends and family. I do the things that I don't normally get to do the other 6 days. And as an artist, in work in general, you'll be more productive in 6 days than you can be in 7.
Yeah.
So that's a huge one. And then just the idea of building a blocked calendar. So I talk about how important Carrie Newhoff's high impact leadership course was for me.
Yeah.
And there's a little plug for Carrie, but it was really significant for me to take these things that are very high priority for me, but also to figure out where my high and low energy times of the day were, and then to build a calendar. So I go into every week knowing what my schedule and calendar and priorities look like before, Monday hits.
Right. And it sounds like in some ways you're talking about put those big non-negotiables in first, and then sort of move down the priority list to figure out where the other blocks of time get spent. So like if you say that exercise is a priority, or you say that Bible time is a priority, or family time or Sabbath time, put those in first.
Right.
Non-negotiable, big rock, and then you're fitting in. I mean, that's maybe more than a creative calendar, but in that sense, it would be like we know Christmas is coming, we know Easter is coming. There's a postcard we have to make in communications, and then there's like a major campaign we have to do. Don't let the busyness of the little projects get in the way of those big ones that can't be missed.
Yeah, it's like if I say songwriting is important, but the only times that I'm writing songs are when I'm on a songwriting retreat. Songwriting is important. It's going to show up on my calendar. So I'm going to put on my calendar, hey, every Tuesday morning from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock, I'm going to be songwriting because that's important for me. But yeah, if that would fall into all kinds of different categories. I mean, you could even move this out, like you said, into like a monthly or an annual calendar. Yeah. When do we need to start thinking about Christmas and what we're going to do? That's probably September if you want to execute it really well. Yeah. If not like, oh, that's always rolling around in my brain.
Yeah. And so we at C4 have developed a culture. We're growing a culture, I should say. We have not arrived around creative work, creative practice, creative teams. And this really fun thing began a few years ago where we began to how we recognize people for their being awesome. So tell us about the scriptural place that comes from, and then how we recognize people.
You are being awesome. Who doesn't like to hear that? So one of the things that has been really significant for me for probably the last 10 years is building this pastoral prayer of ministry. So my prayer has been that we would be a Colossians 3 church filled with John 4 worship led by Psalm 78 leaders. And we could spend all day talking about those things, but what we've keyed on is this Psalm 78 leadership idea. Psalm 78:72 talks about God calling David out of the sheepfold to shepherd Israel with an upright heart and guide them with a skillful hand. And so this upright heart, skillful hand has become a little bit of a quick go-to for us to talk about the kinds of people we're looking to have as part of our ministry, and also what we're looking to grow here. And, the skill part, sometimes churches get caught in this tension of, well, we want skill, but not too much. We want it to be excellent, but not a show. And I understand that conversation. That's a really tough conversation to have. But if the conversation is not balanced with this character, upright heart side, it becomes even harder. So we've said, hey, we do want very skillful hand people. We want great guitar players. We want great singers. We want great fill in the blank. But we also want great character. We want people who love to be together. We want people who love this church. We want people who love Jesus. We want people who love worship ministry. We want people who are excited about what God's doing in our church. If you're a great guitar player, but you're a jerk, it's not going to go well. The trade-off is not worth it.
Yeah, you have like a major addiction to alcohol. Right. So, like addiction issues, right. You're a jerk. Yeah. You have a whole secret life.
Right. And on the flip side, there's the whole, well, she's got a great heart, so let's let her sing. Yeah. When like normally,
she means well.
Yeah, like great hearts sound terrible if they're not paired with this skillful hand. So you don't need to have it one way or another. And we've really invested in building a community where we have very high skill expectations. We don't lower those. We set the bar really high, and we've seen over the last 4 years, our teams really rise to the occasion, really rise to the bar we set on both skill and character. So then we said, and through it's the whole Andy Stanley, you'll replicate what you celebrate. So it's easy to celebrate skill. Like, man, you killed it on that song. Man, like the mix sounded great. Like the lighting was whatever. When we did that video, it was fantastic. The skill stuff is easy, and artists love to
And it's easy to see.
It's easy to see. It's very visible.
Measure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in one sense,
you can audition that.
Yeah, and in one sense, like everyone can recognize that. Whether you're an artist or not, you know when a song is good, done well, or done poorly. But it's like, man, how could we recognize great character? That's a lot harder because, part of great character is not wanting to be recognized for it. So we created this thing in the context of our team nights, this phrase of heart and hands. So we created the Heartsy Awards, and we said, we're going to take an opportunity at these team nights, these sort of safe venues where we just really build into our team culture, and we're going to celebrate people and give them Heartsy Awards. And it's a chance for us to brag on people who hit on both sides. Now, we don't just brag on people like, oh, you're an okay musician, but like you showed up to rehearsal early. That's not enough for us. We want people who like really dive in on the skill side and on the character side. So for example, we recognize people with Heartsy Awards who like, oh, you were like better than mediocre keyboard player, but when we threw main stage at you and we asked you to like really double down on it, you rose to the occasion and like you bought your own computer. You
main
bought
stage being a program,
being software program. To like you know, when we had a Sunday where a bass player canceled, and when the worship leader called a fill-in bass player, that bass player had already practiced all the songs just in case the worship leader was going to call.
That was wild.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So it's those kinds of things. Sometimes it's the one-off things. Sometimes it's kind of the longer character showing itself. But we figured we can't only congratulate skill, we also want to recognize. And then we make it fun. So we buy a very prestigious golden plastic trophy from the dollar store, and we recognize them in front of kind of all their peers, and we blow it out. So like I just go over the top talking about how amazing these people are. I hand them the trophy. The entire room erupts in applause, standing ovation. And it's just fun. It's a really fun way to recognize we care more about how you play your instrument. Oh, they cry. It's beautiful. It's amazing. But like we care about you as a person, and we want to see you grow in your character just like we want to see you grow in your skill. Yeah. And we're trying to build a team of people, really like a community of people who place these things as priority. Yeah.
And so one of the ways that you're doing that is like people are saying, okay, like how do you develop? Okay, I know how to teach someone how to play guitar better. That feels like it makes sense. We can train someone in how to be a better photographer. But one of the ways that you have developed is this book that you've written, 52 Sundays.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that book.
Yep. So I think leaders always look for what are the gaps and how can we help fill them. And so I saw a gap where with Bible study specifically devoted to worship teams. So I thought, man, one of the things I hear all the time from worship leaders is like, I'd love to do some Bible time with my teams, but I just run out of time during the week to like write my own thing or find my thing. So I basically just created this worship team Bible study, and it's sort of a one-stop solution. So there's 52 devotions, 52 entries in it, and it's a short passage of scripture. It's a short reflection that I've written. It's a couple of questions and then a prayer. And the idea is, you use that verbatim as a leader, and you can kind of roll it out in 10, 15 minutes as part of your rehearsal. Use it as a starting point, jump off into some other ideas. But the reflections and the questions are targeted specifically to worship teams.
Right.
And so it'll help your team develop and grow as they're thinking about what does the Bible say about who God is? What does the Bible say about how we worship? Yeah. What does the Bible say about who we are as worship leaders?
Yeah. And I mean, I would imagine this resource is being used by people. Have you heard any feedback? Like people are using it, so like I'd love to know, like outside of our own, like in the larger worship world.
Yeah.
Like has that been begun to develop more heart and hand, more of that Heartsy Award lifestyle in people?
Yeah, I mean, it's available two ways. One way is people, if you go to worshipteambiblestudy.com, you can just sign up and it shows up in your inbox every Monday morning and it's ready to go. It'll do that for 52 weeks. Or you can go, chrisvacher.com has the resource you can download. It's $10. It's kind of all packaged in one deal. The cool thing about the email one is every week there's around like 1,500 churches all around the world who are getting these devotionals to their inbox. And there are stories that come back on just how, sometimes it's around the timing, like, oh man, our team needed this specific thing this week, which is always really cool to hear, or like, oh, thanks, you helped me as a leader, or hey, this came up last week, can you help us wrestle through this? So it's always really cool to hear how, this idea gets turned into a resource that helps people in all kinds of different places.
Yeah. And so let's talk about songwriting. Let's spend the last bit of our time together. Let's see how long we have and how long we can go into this, because you could talk about this. In fact, just this weekend you led a workshop in this, and it was like an 8-hour workshop on songwriting. Yeah. So we don't have that much time. But talk to us about where this came from in your life, songwriting and songwriting as discipleship.
Yeah.
And then let's get into some of the details of that, how that plays out here.
Yeah, like I've always been kind of a fairly mediocre songwriter. Like I've done it. I remember in high school sitting at the piano and writing like terrible lyrics and awful melodies, but that's okay. Like everyone starts out terrible at something.
Yeah.
Like kid's playing baseball right now, and like he's a terrible baseball player. That's okay. He's 7 years old. Like 7-year-olds are supposed to be terrible at baseball, but he has a desire and he has a commitment. He has a willingness to learn and keep going. And I sort of had that with songwriting. In 2009, I got really frustrated with seeing sort of this disparity between what I was seeing in other countries around the world, Australia, England, the United States, where there were all of these amazing songs that we were singing and like we were loving singing them. We were singing them in Canada, but there weren't really any Canadian songs coming up. At least not in equal proportion to what I saw happening in other places around the world. And it was like, I'm not okay with that. So started a thing where we brought writers together from across the country. We did an album. We had songs sung in a bunch of churches, really exciting. Saw really great relationships form out of that and some great songs. And then as part of coming to C4, there was already this kind of heartbeat and drive that we would be a place where songwriting would happen, inspired by what God was doing locally. Yeah. And so, in the same way, you're a 7-year-old that wants to play baseball, what do? Well, you sign up for a team and you go play. So we sort of did the same thing. Like, okay, if we're going to be this church, how are we going to do it? We got to start somehow. So we started bringing people together for songwriting events.
Where are the quote-unquote 7-year-olds with a desire to play?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there might be a bunch of terrible songwriters, but there might be some people who, you show up and it's like, I've never known that I could do this for the church. I write songs, or I have the ability, or I have the desire, and what do? Well, you just get involved, you stay committed, you have a willingness to learn. So we've done that over the last 4 years. We've done songwriting workshops and songwriting retreats and songwriting days, and we've seen some people rise up from within our own congregation. We've brought friends in from the outside. We've had some help. We've had some people kick us in the butt. We've gotten a ton of advice and feedback. Yeah. And it's become this really, really cool part where we've gone from this desire and this willingness to now where we could say, yeah, we are writing some really great songs together as a church.
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing the fruit of a bunch of years of learning and not being very good yet. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I remember on an early songwriting retreat, it was great. We're bringing in people who were more experienced from the outside, whether they were known songwriters, known people or not, that didn't really matter. Yeah. They were just more experienced than us, and the songs were songs. They were songs.
They had a beginning, and some of them had an end.
Some of them had a chorus or a bridge, but not guaranteed because we were learning. So right. They were half songs at least. And so from there, just coming, it's fresh for us because you and I just most recently last week were able to write. Actually, we wrote together. Actually, you and I were in a writing time together in a session, and so tell us a little bit about that in a second. But my point being that we've seen now, and we're starting to see the fruit of what you started here at C4 years ago because our leadership said we think this matters.
Yeah. And I think that's a leadership principle too, to remember, like, if I judged my son's ability as a Major League Baseball player only by watching him as a 7-year-old, well, clearly that's not going to happen. Yeah. Now, I mean, chances are he's never going to make the major leagues, but that's not the point. I've got to give him the opportunity to invest, and I've got to put him in the right environments where he's getting poured into as a baseball player. So the same thing is true with songwriting. And
because the things you get out of baseball aren't just about getting to the major leagues. There's other things about why we play baseball, not just becoming pro.
Yeah. So with our songwriting, we've had 4 years of songwriting retreats and a real strong emphasis on this, because it wasn't like, well, we tried this once and we had a couple good songs, like, way to go, guys. Yeah. That's great. I guess it didn't work. We've had this like constant faithfulness and investment and leadership priority, I would say, from our staff, where we've just said, no, like, this is going to be something that we're doing. So then there's a responsibility on me as a leader to say, like, who are the right people? What's the right environment for it to happen? What's the right coaching? And it gets back to this pressure principle. How hard do we push? Where do we push? And so, we've just come out of a writing retreat where in 48 hours, there's 16 or 17 songs.
Yeah. 5 sessions. Yeah. 12 people divided into groups of 3. come out the other end with almost 20 songs.
And, are all of those going to be sung in services or make an album? No. But, what we can't measure is the relational impact. We can't measure the time that those people were able to spend in the Word together, the time that those people were able to have conversation about what do we want the song to do. Even then, those songs then come and get shared with the larger group, this group of 12, like those moments of worship to these fresh worship songs.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, I'm the one that everyone was super excited about. I missed it.
Maybe I should tell us about that.
And the reason was I had to be at 7-year-old baseball. That's why
And that was good.
That's why I missed it. So, on this most recent retreat, there was, a team that came out and felt like, we got a chorus or we got a bridge or something, and it becomes this significant inspiration for really meaningful times of worship.
And so then out of the sessions where we're divided into these small groups of 3, we're coming back together to show and tell, whether we have a full, complete thing or just a line. We show whatever we got. This is a non-judgmental environment. And I remember, like someone with us this week for the first time, they didn't realize they would have to share a little bit about the song and why they wrote it before they shared whatever parts of it were complete. And so then it became very emotional for her because it was such it was writing out of a very personal part of her own story, and we were able to sing. But yeah, there was this little chorus. The whole song wasn't done, and we end up like it just led us into worship, and we just like the 12 of us. We heard it for the first time, and it became a very special time of worship and prayer. And sorry you missed it.
Well, and then my hope is that's not the only environment where that song lives, and who knows. But I think it's just the idea that as a leader, if you're listening and you're a creative leader, you got vision for something. Like, are you willing to stick with it for 3, 4, 5, 10 years? But the flip is like, is your vision big enough too, right? So. Like my vision for our songwriting here has always been very, very big. Nobody would accuse me of having too small a vision. Where we did bring in some professional songwriters because I believed we would have people who could kind of rise to the level where they could be at that caliber.
Right.
And, so if you're thinking about maybe, hey, I'm having some trouble talking with my pastor or leadership about us starting something new, maybe one option is to go back and think like, is my vision big enough in this thing that it could be something that would need to be sustained for 3, 4, 5, 10 years? Because I think that's in the water and lots of stuff at C4, but in our songwriting, that is one of those factors. Like, we can't kill it after 3 years because we're nowhere near it becoming the thing that we see it becoming. We're singing songs in our services. We just released our second album. We're doing these songwriting workshops where we're helping like equip and encourage a lot more, way more songwriters. So we're starting to see, like these branches start to show a bit of fruit, and there's no shortcuts. We wouldn't have got to the place we are now without the 4 years of investment and commitment and willingness.
Yeah. And what are you seeing that in when we're talking about those Heartsy Awards, Heart in Hand? What are you seeing happen in those when we make space to become better at songwriting? What's happening from the perspective of discipleship, care? Because we've just talked a lot about the skill development. We've gotten better at doing songwriting. Yeah. But talk to me about the other side. What have you seen come out of that here or in other places?
I mean. As a church, and if you're listening, you might be at a church, you might not be, but whatever organization you're a part of, for us as a church, our mandate is to make fully devoted followers of Jesus. Like, that's what we do. We disciple people. And so everything we do as a church kind of revolves around the universe of discipleship, including songwriting. So, there's lots of opportunities for fruit of the Spirit to be grown in your life. Gentleness, kindness, faithfulness. There's a story that we tell often where I was in a co-writing session and we had this inspiration for a song, and it happened to be a Christmas song. We thought there was something really special there, and it was a late night writing session, and we got to kind of like 12:30, 1 o'clock, and there's 3 of us in this writing group, and we had a decision to make. We're tired, we're kind of done with this song. We could just go to bed, wake up, maybe get to it another day, or probably not. It would probably fall off our radar. Or we could stick it out, persevere, believe that there was something, not just about the song, but there was something that God wanted to do in us through this. And so we stuck to it. And, a few more hours of work that night. And the song became a song that we sang in our Christmas service a couple years ago. But the memory that I have and the impact of that song was not about singing it in the service. The impact is really the opportunity we had to write it together and what God did in us and among us in that moment. So we're talking about that all the time, that, success or failure of a writing retreat is not always on how many songs come out of it. We're in the people business, right? Like, what we do is about helping people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. So if you go on a writing retreat and you leave that with less excitement for what God is doing in our church and less love for Jesus and fewer friends
because you all had a big fight about the song,
then that's not in the context of discipleship. So we're always trying to evaluate that multiple levels.
Yeah. And so, what would you say? There are churches who do songwriting.
Yeah.
But there aren't that many churches that do songwriting.
Yeah.
So why would you say, if you were speaking to a senior leader of another church, why would they bother trying to get this to happen?
Yeah, so, if you're a typical church, you're probably singing Hillsong and maybe some songs from Bethel or Elevation or Vertical Church or out of the UK, different churches there. And those are all great songs. And one of the privileges that we have, and we should never take this lightly, is we get to join in with the church around the world. It's one of the ways that we express we're this global body, is the songs that we sing, and that's, across geography and across generations. And yet at the same time, there are some songs I believe that your church needs to sing that nobody else can write for you. There are some ways that your own people need to express their personal worship to the Lord out of what God is doing locally among you, and I can't write that song for you. Tim Hughes can't write that song for you. Ben Fielding can't write that song for you. There are people within your congregation. Now, when they write it, is it going to be a song that goes around the world and is sung on one level? That's not your responsibility. You don't get to be in charge of that. And that shouldn't be the pressure point. Our starting point has been, what are the songs that we need to sing here at C4 locally out of what God is doing uniquely among us? That's the only thing we're trying to write for. We're not trying to write for a song for churches in any other place. We're not trying to write more like Hillsong. We're not trying to write more like fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is what would be able to capture the heartbeat of our own congregation, that when we stand up in front of them on a Sunday morning and we as leaders, we get to put these songs into the mouths of our people, that the response would be, oh man, I had to sing that today. I needed, that song was for me. I needed to sing that. And we hear that all the time. And,
that can be true in a church of 100 people.
100%.
There's a family who adopted a baby, and so we're going to write a song because that's really connecting with where our community's at or something. I don't know. It doesn't have to be a big congregation to make a song needing to be sung just for that congregation. Yeah,
exactly. And it doesn't need to be albums, and it doesn't need to be iTunes. It might just be, a simple chorus one day that just tells a story of adoption, because that's on the heart of the congregation, because they've seen that in front of people. So what does it mean for us to be adopted into the family of God? Man, that's beautiful. But there are some of those songs that nobody else can write for you. So what does that look like? Well, now you got to do the hard work of figuring it out and framing it out and visioning it out and finding the right people, and then, having the commitment and the willingness to just stick with it.
Yeah. And so on the other side then, so most songs won't make it anywhere.
Yeah.
Most songs won't make it out of the room they're written in.
Yeah.
Some songs get shared a little farther, whether that's to a few people, to the bedside of a sick person, to kids ministry, youth ministry, adult ministry. Some get onto an album somewhere in the world. But some songs make it farther than that. Mm-hmm. They have a larger place. And so, what do you do with success, I guess is what I'm trying to ask. And I think for some of that, I think that's not where we are today at C4. But you have a huge vision for this church, and God has has given us vision for this church, but that's not everybody. Leaders have vision. And so what happens when we get successful, or what happens when a song goes farther? What do we do about that?
Yeah, my experience has been that some of the fear side, like some of the shadow side of this, is that some of the questions around like what if prevent us from even getting started in the first place.
Like the fear of success is bigger than the fear of failing.
So like, what if this song gets sung by 1 million people and starts selling 1 million copies? Oh. Okay, well, like, let's figure that out. But the truth is, in the real practical sense of it, like that's like winning the lottery. So, are you having the same conversations with your people about like, well, what are you going to do if you win the lottery? Are you going to give, like, it's on this, you should be concerned about it in the same way. And there are personality types in church leadership that tend to be more conservative. That's not an always rule, but it's a tendency. And so sometimes what can happen is sort of the fear of success or the unknown trumps the opportunity to even get started. So if you're in that kind of culture and you need to talk through that, that's for sure a thing to explore, and we've done that here. And I guess what I would say is that our starting point still has never changed. Our starting point is we want to write songs that our church will sing.
Right.
Some of those songs have gone on to be sung by other churches, not to the point where C4 Worship or C4 is a household name, but we are seeing that happen, and we're super grateful about that. We thank the Lord for that. We're so grateful that these songs would be a way not only for our own church, but other churches. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's really exciting for us. But our focus has to be in this season to write songs that our church will sing. Yeah. Now, as we get better at it and we grow kind of in ability, I think by nature, the opportunities will increase. And that's like anything. You get better at anything, people are going to take notice of that. Yeah. So more and more people will sing the song. But it's like, that's why you've got to be so crystal clear in what is your purpose in this. Why do you want to do this? And for us, the why is to write songs for our church to sing.
And so for creatives in general, outside of songwriting, then the similar question, I think there's sometimes a fear that is unspoken. Some people have the courage to say it out loud, but it's sort of from a sinful place, I think, in leadership, where like, if I train this person up to be great at X, they will leave. And forget songwriting. That can be any skill within the church. If they become an awesome leader, they're going to go get a job somewhere else. Yep. What do you do with that? And you've been in ministry a long, like 20 years. Yeah. So what do you say to that?
Yeah. So my starting point, I get called often. Hey, we need a worship leader, a worship pastor at our church. Who do you know? So my first go-to is like, who's on our team that's ready for that opportunity? I always am open-handed, and so we went through this recently. So somebody came to me and said, "Hey, need a leader." Great. Here are 3 people on our team that I think are ready for an opportunity, and if I had an opportunity to give them a chance to step up into a full-time paid role, these are the people I would go for. And the reason I think you don't need to be afraid of that is there's 2 sides to it. One is, if there's an opportunity from a kingdom perspective, and you have somebody on your church, your staff, volunteer, whatever, and the opportunity is at the place where like the Lord is calling them to go from your place to their place. That's a win for the kingdom. You don't want to do anything that would stand in the way of God achieving his purposes. And you get the privilege of either being a part of it or not being a part of it, but God's purposes will be achieved. So why not be a part of it? The flip side is, if you present this person with the opportunity to say, hey, I've put your name forward for this position because I really think you would be a great fit for it. And they take time in conversation and in prayer, and they come back to you, and this is what's happened, and they say, I really appreciate it, but like, I'm really committed here. I want to be part of what God is doing in this place. That's a kingdom win.
They want to stay.
They want to stay. And now you've built trust with them. They never think that you're keeping anything from them. They recognize probably that they're a key leader in what you're doing. It also helps them if they don't think that they're a key leader. Now they know, because you have that level of confidence and trust in them, and it builds your relationship. And so why not do it? And, are there some people in my time who have left that I wish we could have kept? Yeah, of course, 100%. Do I regret ever recommending someone for a position? Never. Yeah. Because it's a kingdom win all around.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what you said. Like, often when you offer someone an opportunity elsewhere, it only affirms them wanting to stay.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of works the opposite of what we think it will. For many people, it just says, oh, I'm so committed here, I can't go there. I have to do this more here. Yeah. So just as we close, what's an encouragement that you want to, I mean, what's on your mind today? You've got your own teams. You're going into meetings with teams. How do you want to encourage, particularly a young creative person today?
Yeah.
What's one thing that they should do this week? Or know this week?
Yeah, I just think, if you haven't heard it from any people you work with or the pastor you work for, leaders you're under, like the work that you're doing has real value, and not just because it's work to get a thing done, but because of the way that God's created you and these creative abilities that you have, that has value in the world and in the church. And don't get too scared to so that you stop before you even start. But whatever your creative outlet is, whatever your role is, it has real value, real meaning. And if you haven't heard that lately from the person that leads you, hear it from me, that what you're doing is really important. It has real significance.
Yeah. And just last, how will people find you if they want to find you online?
Yeah, chrisvacher.com is where all things are there. And then on social media, most of my stuff is Chris from Canada.
And Vacher is Vacher. Vacher.
chrisvacher.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Joe.
I just love being able to have that conversation with Chris. I hope that you enjoyed it too. I just love getting in his head a little bit, and obviously you can see that we are friends and we love to laugh together, and we have a lot of shared history, and I hope out of that you can glean some things that might be an encouragement to you today and as you start this new year. So next week's episode, I have another friend of mine. His name is James Adams. James Adams is the boss behind Visual Media Church, or visualmediachurch.com. Maybe you've seen VMC stuff around. He also has a company called Stock Hub, and it's all about stock video. So he's a videographer, he's a businessman, and he's offering all kinds of content for churches to use. A lot of it's on a subscription basis, but we're getting into the business of offering things to church. We're going to talk about filmmaking and how he, as a business person in the church sphere, manages and works through that tricky balance of ministry and business. I think it's going to be just a great conversation, a really frank conversation. He's a direct kind of guy, a no-nonsense kind of guy, and I think you're going to love the conversation with James next week. And we have maybe a little announcement, actually, between James and I to share with you next week, so can't wait to do that. So we'll see you next week on Word Made Digital.
Thanks for listening to the Word Made Digital podcast with Joanna LaFleur. Head over to joannalafleur.com for more practical tools, interviews, and videos for creatives and communicators. We'd love to help you be the best you can be at communicating the best news in the world. Tap that subscribe button.